We're so grateful that folks are joining. We know people are going to continue rolling in over the next few minutes, so welcome, welcome. Before we even get started, we want to let folks know that we have interpretation into Spanish and ASL available here. Language justice is really important to our work, and we're always trying to learn and get better and grow stronger in this. So ASL interpretation, you can see Deborah on the screen. She should be up as a panelist. And for Spanish interpretation, go to the bottom of the Zoom bar and you'll see a little symbol that looks like a globe. Press it and choose Spanish or English, whichever language you'd like to be in. Andrea, do you mind if I bump it to you to say that in Spanish as well?
Sure. Para acceder la interpretación simultánea al español, le pueden dar clic al botón que dice interpretación en el fondo de la pantalla y parece un globo.
All right. Thanks, Andrea. So I'd like to just actually start us off with some music from a dear friend and very talented musician. And she's going to share a song with us before we dive in. And I feel like I say this quote all the time. It's one of my favorite quotes. But I'd love to just bring in the words of legendary feminist Toni Cade Bambara, who taught us that the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think as feminists, we know how crucial art is to sustaining our joy and to our movement work. And so I'm really excited to welcome Beilu to introduce herself and to share a song with us, and also tell us where we can find more of your work. Over to you, Beilu.
Hello, thank you, Mara. Thank you for inviting me and always welcoming me into these beautiful spaces and giving me an opportunity to be musical. Yeah, I'm Beilu. You can find my music. I have music on Spotify, Beilu Elisa, and I'm just gonna be playing a song that kind of reflects on some environmental humanities, like thoughts, and just like reevaluating our relationships with the non-human world. So yeah, thank you. I'm gonna just get into it. Seduced by its your perfume, temptation employs me to disrupt sanctuary, disrupt sanctuary, disrupt sanctuary. Breaking gentle branches from their vitality. Breaking gentle branches from their vitality. And Lord, unlike any other, conspires to tear a jewel from its mother. A potent concoction trickles through moist air. Melting into vascular devices, removing tightness, unhinging constrictions, positively paradise, state of mind, state of mind. by your design. Considerately, I can see to pick a fallen leaf. Rather than extract the glowing seed, letting it live its own dream, outside of the one I was taught I could deem. Outside of the one I was taught I could deem. Outside of the one, 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 outside of the one I was taught I could deem. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Beilu.
Thank you.
If you want to give people more information about how to find you and find more of your music.
Yeah, I'll just put in the chat. My name is just Beilu Elisa. If you just look me up on Instagram or Spotify or SoundCloud, that's what it is. Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to hear from all the amazing panelists. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you so much for starting off the call on such an uplifting note. And we're so grateful for everyone who has joined us. And we're really excited to envision more radical futures together. I'd like to just remind everyone that we have interpretation available in ASL. Thank you, Deborah. Y también tenemos interpretación disponible en español. Y pueden accederla dándole clic a El Mundo, que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla, y seleccionando español. And to start us off, I'd like to quote Arundhati Roy, who reminds us that another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And just for some grounding introductions and context setting, in recent weeks, the climate crisis has raged around us in increasingly violent ways, compounded by the systemic violence of white supremacy and a global pandemic, from catastrophic wildfires to hurricanes and oil spills. We are witnessing the devastating effects of centuries of extraction, harm, exploitation, and inequality at the hands of colonialism, patriarchy, and capitalism. In the midst of climate crises, there are, of course, many who have always been and are calling for a reckoning. It has become increasingly evident that young feminists are at the forefront of the climate justice movement.
And I think as young climate feminists, we bring together systemic analyses that always foreground justice, they foreground intersectionality, they prioritize coalition building and solidarity. And we understand that the roots of cis-hetero patriarchy, climate change, and environmental injustice, they lie in colonialism and capitalism. And for this exact reason, we work at the intersections of diverse movements, across movements, and among them, understanding that at their core, these are all deeply intertwined. And by grasping at the root of climate and gender injustice, young climate feminists offer alternatives to the extractive violent systems that shape our current realities, building and imagining transformative worlds that actually do center care, they center hope, they center community, they center relationships, and they center liberation. And we know that any global feminist climate justice movement must heed the leadership of feminists from the global south, of feminists who are Black and Indigenous, and of young feminists.
Yeah, and as you can probably tell, we are your moderators for today. My name is Andrea. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Dominican climate and environmental justice advocate working on communications and global advocacy at WEDO, and I'm currently based in Brooklyn, New York.
And I'm Mara. I'm an Irish-American feminist climate writer, an organizer, and feminist, always trying to be better at all of those things, working on policy and advocacy with Andrea, also based in Brooklyn.
And in our work at the Women's Environment and Development Organization, WEDO for short, we're fortunate to work in collective with powerful visionary activists from around the world. And this Climate Week, we just wanted to celebrate the transformative future building of just a few of these amazing feminists who you can see with us.
So I am just so honored to be looking out at this really all-star panel of women who I admire, who I learn from, and who I can't imagine having better people to start off a Friday conversation with. So instead of how these are often done with us as moderators, choosing how to make you all known to the space, we'd love to actually invite you all to introduce yourselves with anything that you'd like to share into the space. But in particular, maybe I'd welcome folks to say their name and pronouns if they'd like, as well as something that is bringing you joy. But please do add anything else that you'd like us to know about you. So I'll go ahead and first kick it off to Frances.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here this morning. So yeah, my name is Frances Roberts Gregory. I am an eco-womanist. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I would say joy. I would say the possibility for political transformation, as well as love, people showing kindness to one another through mutual aid. That's giving me a lot of joy right now.
Thanks, Frances. All right, next I'll bump to Maggie.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Mandera. I'm based in Zimbabwe and I work for an eco-feminist alliance called Women African Alliance. And I define myself as an eco-feminist as well. In terms of what's bringing me joy, I would say music. Belu, your performance today actually nearly brought me to tears. It's been an emotional week. In terms of the work that we've been doing, and so thank you for that. And so yeah, music.
Thanks, Maggie. Sanam.
Hello everyone, evening where I am, but what a great way to spend a Friday evening. I can't think of any other group of people that I'd be with. I'm Sanam. I've been practicing a little bit of ASL, so I know that it's SANAM, but perhaps Deborah can correct that. In English, I'm all right with all pronouns, as I also speak with another language with gender neutral pronouns. And right now, what's bringing me joy is being part of this conversation. But I think also over the last few months, what has also been bringing me joy is being in different kinds of community, both online and in person, which includes our Feminist COVID-19 Response Collective, our Feminist Sci-Fi Book Club, the local Anti-Racism Coalition, the neighborhood support group that I joined at the start of the COVID-19 lockdown. It makes me feel both happy and purposeful to be part of all of these and to know that this kind of work exists to build understanding and give support. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I'm so excited.
Thanks, Sanam. We're glad you're here. Next, I'll go to Patricia. Welcome.
Hey, everyone. Good evening also from where I'm in now. I'm in Jakarta, Indonesia. Well, I'm Patricia Watimena. I'm originally from Indonesia. I'm an indigenous from a coastal living community called Haruku. It is in the eastern part of Indonesia. I'm working with the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development. We're based in Chiang Mai, Thailand. What brings me joy is actually really being part of this gathering. It brings me a lot of joy. I think this gathering is really an evidence of nothing can really stop us to mobilize and really speak out as young feminists to amplify the voices and then our demands. So yeah, being part of this gathering is, creating such an amazing feeling. I feel that a lot of honor to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. And next I'll go to Maria Alejandra.
Hey, hello, hola, buenos días. I'm Maria Alejandra, and I'm quite happy to share this space with you all and the rest of the panelists. I think I'm excited to see what happens in this conversation and where we get to. I am currently at my family's house in Colombia, and it's a sunny day for a change, which is good. And I am currently working and leading the climate and environmental justice work at FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund. It's a global fund dedicated to resourcing young feminists initiatives. And what is bringing me joy, I think over the past few months, I can see so many of my friends and close community producing their own food, me included, building our own planters and producing our own alcohol, producing our own sweets, medicine, which I think has been a realization for many people in a collective way of how we can be closer to that type of sovereignty. And it's like a crack in the system. So I'm quite happy and joyful to see that we can start imagining these types of new dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra. And thanks all for introducing yourselves into the space. Welcome, and we're so happy to have you all here. So the next question I feel like leads us really naturally into thinking through the intersectionality of this work and the real positioning that I think young climate feminists in particular have in understanding the ways that climate justice and gender justice are so deeply intertwined. And even in hearing what you all just spoke to in terms of what is bringing you joy and those connections to this work makes me think about how many different entry points there really are to this work and to this intersection that I think we all work at in different ways. So I would love to hear from each of you a little bit about what led you here. What entry points did you find yourself coming through to find yourself here? And what brings you here today? So maybe I'll start with Sanam, is that okay?
Sure. For me, it all started with wanting to write and tell stories, and that was something that I knew from the time I was 11 or 12 years old. In fact, I actually studied literature for my undergraduate degree. But then that translated into my first job in journalism, and then into doing documentary film work in Bangladesh. And doing that gave me the opportunity to travel all around the country and really see and learn how the landscape, the weather, the agriculture, the animals, population in the forest are all changing. So a few years into this, when I moved into civil society and organizing work, which included both the advocacy and the communications work, you didn't have to tell me that climate change was happening, or that it was hurting poor communities more, or that it was affecting women differently. I'd already learned this, and I'd seen how much more work it is for women and girls. One of the sad statistics in Bangladesh is that every time we have a climate disaster, the rate of child marriage jumps up because communities are more vulnerable, and that's an extra mouth to feed if there's a daughter who's unmarried in the house. And worldwide, women and girls are the ones who are collecting or pumping water, then carrying it home, boiling it, filtering it, and storing it at home. So once I moved into this activism work and not just climate, but human rights work, labor organizing, I've found myself telling policymakers more than once that the objective shouldn't be to make it easier for women to do the domestic work, the care work. You don't use your uterus to collect the water. So why should we talk about why shouldn't we talk about what we need to do to share work, which is of course the principle behind redistributing care work. So to me, it's just so like from lived experience is very obvious, coming from a global South country that didn't contribute to the pollution that led to the climate change, and yet that's the country that's going to go under in a very short time. In fact, so much coastal land has been lost already. So I think, yeah, that's kind of how, like, I feel like I didn't have a choice about it. It was where I was and who I was.
Thanks, Sanam. I remember earlier you told me, and I think in the graphic for this webinar, you said denial was never an option for me. Climate denial was never an option. Thanks for sharing all of that with us. Sorry. All right, maybe next I'll bump it to Maggie. Is that okay?
Sure. I think actually similar to Sanam, I also studied literature, and so a lot of my instinctive passion is around narratives and how to disrupt particularly destructive and violent narratives that are taking place across my continent and around the world. And so I think initially a lot of the work that I was doing was around sex and sexual violence and the body as territory, and understanding sort of the violations that are happening between people in communities, mainly urban communities. And then I sort of started to work more closely with rural communities that are impacted by mining activities and other big extractive activities, and seeing the degree of violence that was taking place on people, and particularly on women, and also on the land, and how communities would often express that violence as very much linked in their experience and understanding of what was going on to them, and this entire logic of extractivism, of violence, of destruction, of domination, and how that is playing out on women's bodies and is also playing out on our territories, our larger territories, land, forests, water. And so I think, yeah, I became really sort of intrigued and enraged by what I was seeing and what I was hearing, and what people were facing, and wanted to find a way to support that work, support those voices. So much of that trauma is silenced or erased from this dominant narrative of development, which we are taught to see as good, and as something that we should want on the African continent. But actually the reality of it is one of violence and destruction and negation of so many people, of so many histories, and of so much. And so, yeah, that's where my passion comes from, and why I'm involved in this work. And like Sanam, denial was never an option. And it's this rage, I guess, that fuels me to continue.
Thanks, Maggie. I really appreciate all of that. I think I actually also would name my entry point as sexual violence prevention work as well into this intersection. And I think the links between bodily autonomy and fighting for radical futures in which bodily autonomy is not only one, but the right to a livable future, safe from all forms of violence, that connection is so clear, and I think is the entry point for so many feminists who come into this work. Thanks for sharing. Next, I'll ask Maria Alejandra.
Yeah, I wish I had studied literature, so just to join the combo. I didn't though. I would say that my entry points are various in a way. I grew up very close to rural areas, to the mountains, to the Andes here in Colombia. Always felt a admiration for the wilderness, for the fears of nature here that is just abundance. And eventually, and this is like what, 15, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, over the period as I was growing up, I began seeing and understanding much more the already felt effects of climate change, especially in rural and peasant communities who 20 years ago just didn't quite understand why were their crops being so diminished, why the rain wasn't coming, and how that translated to their own lives, to the sustainability of their own livelihoods, how to carry on just basic living without your main income, without your main possibility of connection with nature. So I think observing those changes in a very quick pace pushed me to study in an academic way a lot of climate, food, and environmental policy. I did a lot of research in rural areas with peasant communities, especially rural women who are currently organizing on many fronts, trying to defend land on many ways, trying to get access to land, rights to land, trying to stop extractive industries from entering their territories, while at the same time trying to cope with the unprecedented effects of climate change in these areas. And to me, seeing the resistance of especially these women, of youth as well, who resist the fact that they have to leave their space, their environments, their ecologies for another livelihood because the system is pushing them to do so, has been really inspiring, and I think has been key to my own understanding of the role that I can play in uplifting this work of resistance, these works of creating alternatives, and resourcing these new realities. For a long time, I have participated in different climate international spaces, the UN, the Youth Constitution, the Women and Gender Constituency. And I have learned a lot from these spaces, especially how inevitable it is that we need to do work of advocacy, of change, of resistance, of presence and participation in these international spaces, alongside a robust, diverse climate justice movement. And at some point, I have felt that my journeys in that space have shifted a bit, because I have been welcomed, invited to the feminist movement, which I think I'm naturally coming into as a queer feminist, as somebody who also wants to uplift the diversity of bodies and bodily autonomy, as you were saying, Mara. And to me, the feminist, young feminist, and ecofeminist movement have opened a new way to relate to the multiple crises that we live around us, basically by my observation of myself, by coming back to my body, by embodying the sensations, the anger, the fear, the sorrow, the pain of watching what is happening in the world right now, and so much pain and so much injustice, and seeing how I can transfix it and transform it within myself as well, and how the presence of the collective in that process is so key. So I think that I have been quite encouraged to uplift the community, the collective, the family behind the struggle and the resistance, thanks to the ecofeminist movement. And then lastly, and to close, I'm currently, as I said, part of this Young Feminist Fund, which I never thought I would end up in a fund, as always being somebody who's asking for funds and organizing and doing work with other youth. But the work that Frida is doing, and so many other really admirable people are doing in this area of philanthropy, is quite, to me, it's quite amazing, because it's a subtle way of disrupting the system. It's a subtle way of transferring the resources that are needed and that are just to the people who have the alternatives and are at the front lines, not only of impacts, but also on the front lines of alternatives. So that's a little bit of the journey.
Thanks, Maria Alejandra. I resonated with so much of that, but I'm especially appreciative of the fact that you brought in not only this notion of the diversity of entry points that so many of us had into this movement, but also the diversity of forms of disruption and work that we do to intervene in current systems and crises, and find our places and points of intervention for change and positioning alternatives. So thanks for that. Next, I'd love to pass to Patricia.
Thank you, Mara. Well, what led me to this work, I guess one simple word would be anger. I think I'm still angry now. Angry seeing my own community and many indigenous communities are deprived of their rights to land, natural resources, affected because of their environments is basically destroyed by the current climate crisis, and how badly affected they are, how corporate plunder and capitalism is actually destroying our communities and the world that we are basically living in. But at the same time, I see hope, and that's what keeps me going. And that is, I feel it is my everyday fuel. Hope that actually comes from the resilience, the resistance, the relentless struggles of so many indigenous women in many, many, many corners of this world. They have been challenging the oppressive development and economic system to defend their forests, their natural resources for generations. Like many Berta Cáceres and Greta Thunberg I met in so many indigenous communities I've visited or I lived with, including my own. And yes, again, I guess they are the very reason why I'm here today, because some of us are actually privileged enough to be able to speak out, either as an indigenous, but also to amplify even just the voices of these people in the community. So again, I think those things were actually my entry point, and the struggles of the women is actually the fuel that keeps me going. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. I'm so glad that you started with simply naming a feeling, because I think in the next few questions, we're also hoping to really get at the fact that I think so often in the climate movement and in this work more generally, folks are hesitant to name the feelings that are driving them, and the feelings of how these intersecting crises are so embodied, and they have such affect on our bodies and our feelings and how we are understanding the world and the work that we do. So thank you for naming that straight off the bat. So Frances, I'd love to pass to you next.
Yes, so I'm enjoying listening to everyone's stories. A lot resonates with me as well. So where do I start? I would say that I was a part of this movement before I even knew consciously I was a part of this movement. So I am from the eastern, you could say east and southeast, northeast of the United States, descendant of sharecroppers, field hands, folk who are of African descent, displaced, and diaspora. And so I actually come from 3 environmental justice communities, but I didn't realize this until I went to college. So I went to Spelman College, and it is an institution, a historically Black college and university in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's also one of the few institutions for women of African descent in the United States. And so after going to a women's college, I participated in the Women in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math program. So I was an environmental science major. I was tracked a particular way. And I really found that the curriculum was limited in the sense of not focusing on the intersections of different disciplines, but also just like the social dimensions of ecological issues, conflicts, politics. And so I think I was a junior or senior when I actually stumbled across this literature around gender and climate change. And I remember wanting to write my senior thesis on this intersection and being told by the head of the department, who was a man of color, that was not a worthy topic of study. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I eventually switched my major to sociology and anthropology in order to lift up the narratives of women of color and our solutions for environmental, energy, and climate justice. I should also state that when I was in graduate school at the University of California, Berkeley, I actually facilitated a workshop at the annual Empowering Women of Color conference, and to demystify science and increase the confidence of women in STEM, because although a lot of women literally major in biology, chemistry, physics, a lot of times we don't confidently identify as scientists. So that means we don't apply for funding, we self-select out of positions, we're not mentoring the next generation of environmental scientists and climate leaders. So I figured that as someone who's passionate about mentorship, this would be my intervention. Finally, I would just say that over time, due to the influence of different mentors who conduct participatory action research or community-based research, I decided to focus on how women of color in Gulf Coast Louisiana advocate for climate justice, but also resist environmental racism. And I became a feminist climate activist myself. And then lastly, back in 2017, I want to say I attended the People's Climate Movement March in DC, where I was a attendee of a panelist, I think led by WEDO, and perhaps We Can as well, where there were Indigenous and Black women leading the conversation in the United States around climate change and justice. And I was like, this is it. This is what I need to focus on. And then also I attended the Uprose Youth Climate Justice Summit and realized the importance of women of color, Indigenous and women of color, mentoring the next generation of climate leaders. So, there's many other entry points, but I'll just leave it there.
Thanks, Frances. As someone who has the good fortune of working really closely with you in the Feminist Green New Deal Coalition, I have long admired the way that you are able to bring your academia and your research and your activism and your accountability to communities into your work together, and offers lessons for all of us. So thanks for being here. And I'll pass it to Andrea next, who's gonna bring us into the second question.
Now we're gonna get into like the meat of the meat or the veggies of the whole webinar. We working towards dismantling the intersections of all of the systems of oppression. And we were all led to this work for different reasons, through different entry points. And we're all working towards similar worlds, like alternative worlds, something different. And the next question asks just that: what we're reading or rebuilding? What does a radical feminist future look like, feel like for you? So not just getting at the structural aspect of it, the systemic aspect of it, but also like the affect. What would this what would this world feel like living in it every day, and also the structural, like what would it look like. And I'll pass it on to Maria Alejandra to start us off.
Oof. I love this question. I think I'm like really believing in the power of imagination, and I've said this a couple of times before, in maybe to some of the panelists. But I think the fact that we can imagine radical futures is already a huge richness that we have. The fact that our imaginations haven't been stopped, corrupted, is already, I think, a huge feminist contribution to the world. You know? So I like this question, and I think it's really huge. And I'll say a few things that come into my imaginary world that hopefully will become real. I think I imagine a radical future where we obviously avoid the climate catastrophe, where we have the chance to see that we could have, like, we were able to stop it, that we had the means, that we had the will, that there was enough power being worked together to avoid the climate catastrophe. I imagine a radical future where the political and economical structures are not serving the few, but the many, and are not based in a capitalist way, extractive, profit-driven world. I am not sure how to call that, but I think it's very important to imagine a world that exists beyond what we understand as capitalism and what we have understood that is needed to run the world, to fuel the world, basically. And obviously, I think that is a world of fossil-free, where we have understood that energy sovereignty can come into so many other ways, into so many other symbiotic ways with the world. And I like to imagine a world where we are stepping away from this colonial, rational way of putting everything into binaries, into women, men, into nature, society, into all these dichotomies, which I think leave very little room for imagination to bloom. I want to step away from monocrops in general, from all types of systems that want to streamline, that want to, by efficiency or by, again, profit, want to destroy diversity. And I mean that also in terms of the gender diversity that exists within our many societies and that have been erased, silenced, policed, and violated into so many ways. And I imagine a radical future in which we step away from the fact that we think that there's binaries to contain us, our emotions, our bodies, our expressions, our systems, and that we really step into this way of observing how nature works, that how ecosystems are so entangled, are so complex, are so interdependent, and I like to call these ecologies. No, there's a lot of work, literature, people, organizations, movements doing work around ecologies, Black ecologies, indigenous ecologies. I like to see a diverse amount of ecologies in which, yeah, there's no real need for competition and harm and monocropping. And then lastly, I imagine a radical future that can heal. I think there's deep wounds that so many of us around the world have been carrying due to the colonial violence that our territories, our communities have lived, continue living, due to the racism that we see every day, due to the utmost violence from governments, fundamentalist governments. And as we've said before in this conversation, I think healing, putting at the center those emotions and real feelings, and learning how to heal is, to me, the most radical thing. Knowing that there's a way to heal, that we can really step away from the suffering, no, while after transforming it. And I think there's a lot of interconnections there with spirituality as well. How does spirituality play into this radical future? And there's many ways, but I'd like to see a future that heals, especially the most marginalized peoples, and a future that can celebrate joy and the existence of humans and non-humans as well. I'll leave others to keep complementing these radical futures together.
Thank you so much, Maria Alejandra. I want to live in this world like now. Yeah, and what you really were getting at the beginning, like healing, the importance of healing, and the fact that healing from colonialism, from capitalism, from all these systems, doing away with our ideas of binaries, man, woman, nature, society, that is hard work. Like you said, like that is where the work is at. It's not just like an exercise, it's actually like world building. And it's hard work to do all of that. It's a lifetime and more. So thank you. And I'll pass it on to Sanam.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Maria Alejandra. I think I will echo some of the pieces of what you've said, because it's such a similar vision that I have of healing. I think about, every day there's a little piece of something that I'm doing or a message that I'm putting out that fits into the larger composite of the future that I believe in. If I say, no more, have a pesticides convention to regulate the harmful pesticides, that's because I'm envisioning a world where we can have agroecology, because that really radical feminist future that I like to imagine is, as you've sort of expressed as well, the one where we've destroyed the systems of oppression, the patriarchy, the colonialism, the capitalism, and then those symptoms of those systems, like the inequality, the conflict, the destruction of the planet, that has stopped. And that's the future where we've begun the process of healing, as you've said, and then redistributing, rebuilding. I love to think of a world where we can have these incredible social safety nets that makes it possible for everyone to have healthcare and education, and not, insufferable learning where you hate school, but like interactive and creative and beautiful, that integrates our traditions, our languages, our cultures. And, to bring back the traditions of smallholder farming and recognizing Indigenous communities' roles in that, of course, to grow our food sustainably for a fair wage, so that our forests, our waterways can recover from these generations of extractivism and pollution, of course. I also, in relation to labor organizing and the worries that some people have about the future of work and digitization, I see a world where formal work is a choice according to our interest and our talent, and not a necessity for accessing survival wages or for healthcare. That's unjust, and that always puts us It puts the weakest and most vulnerable communities in the worst position. Because I in that future that I see in the work that I do, I know that safe, peace, and equal societies don't need growth or productivity or these obscene levels of wealth that we're seeing with billionaires profiting off this pandemic and this global level of suffering right now. And in that composition where we have equality, where we've broken up these binaries, and families are people who love each other, who come together. It doesn't matter what gender they identify, how they dress, how they present themselves, what bathrooms we allocate. Although I do want more bathrooms for women and more pockets in our dresses, because that's also symptoms of capitalism and patriarchy. And I just want automation to make it easier for people to work less and have more joy and creativity, as Maria Alejandra was describing.
Thank you so much, Sanam. And you painted such a beautiful picture, truly. And I'll pass it on to Patricia.
Thank you, Andrea. I really enjoyed listening to what Maria Alejandra and Sanam saying. Talking about the world that we imagine is, we need to be ambitious for this. And I think I really imagine a world where the most marginalized and most oppressed women groups are actually able to seek accountability for every single right violation that they experience. Where every indigenous women are able to speak out when their forests are destroyed, their natural resources are grabbed. I want to see a world where the free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous women is obtained, including within their very own community. Radical feminist future for me is a world that gives justice to the people, to the women, to those who are oppressed, where the perpetrators, and in this context, the polluters, the main actors who actually cause climate crisis, are accountable to the injustice that they cause. The world that actually being now in climate crisis, how they are actually contributing to all these damages. I think I want them to be accountable for what they're doing, and all the deepening inequality and injustices that's faced and experienced by women. For those who destroy our planet, we need to name and shame. We need to demand them to be accountable to the massive destruction that brings women into poverty. For me, radical feminist future would be where economies that is actually work for the women and not the women working for the capitalist neoliberal economic system. Thank you.
I love that. And I mean, you said it, like accountability is key to any sort of transformation. Envisioning what that justice will look like. Yeah, so thank you. And I'll pass it on to Maggie.
Thank you. Wow. That was incredible. Thank you. I think, just to say, there's so much power in visioning and dreaming and imagining. So much of the speculative fiction out there, whether it's literature or films, have painted this vision of the future that we are now actually living part of it, that is so sterile, and it's a true dystopia in every sense of the word. And so I think there's a great deal of power in all of us imagining, and all of the many communities around the world who are imagining and creating this radical future every single day. So I want to thank everyone for that. I think, to echo what others would say, for me, this future is, I'll put it in really simple terms, in speaking to some of the things that I've heard people saying in the communities that we are working with is, I would love a future where we can all breathe, and where no child is born with bronchitis or other sorts of diseases that are affecting their lungs and their capacity to breathe, or asthma, or whatever it may be. I would love a world where we can all eat, and where the people who are responsible for growing our food, we are all participating in that exercise. We're all part of that chain. Our relationship to nature is restored, a relationship that capitalism works so hard to destroy. I would love a future where we can be free from violence, and violence in all its many, many forms, whether it is physical or sexual, or the violence of work. Someone was mentioning earlier, I think it was Sanam, and reimagining what it is, what work means. And there's so much violence that we can do to ourselves if we are trapped in this cycle of capitalist notions of how we use our time, how we use our labor, how we labor. So I would love to be free from that. And let's see. I can't even read my own writing. So I'll leave it at that for now, because I think everyone has spoken really powerfully already.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That was so powerful. Yeah, like what would it look like if all the relations that violence severed were reconnected? Like what would that look like? So thank you, and I'll pass it to Francis.
Yes, I echo. I love this vision for the future. Like I don't know if we'll need passports in the future, but I want to go. Sign me up. So yeah, I agree with what everyone has said in reference to looking at food systems differently. We talk about organic and regenerative agriculture, agroecology, economies of care, greening initiatives, green infrastructure. I know here, I'm based in New Orleans right now. We talk about the need for a just transition for workers in extractive industries, which I think is really important because people need training, they need economic development. As an educator, I think climate literacy is really important. I think that unfortunately we're not always able to have the deep conversations that we should have, or even like communicate across political divides, because we're not exposed to the same information. And so, you know, everyone should be exposed to environmental education, no matter if they live in a community that has higher, at least in the United States, pays higher property, it has higher property taxes, or whether you live in affordable housing. I think housing is really important. I grew up in public housing. And so right now we're dealing with people who are getting evicted during disasters, hurricane season. I don't want to see that in a feminist future. And then I think, particularly based on my experience here in the United States, just the need to decriminalize folk who are protecting water, decriminalize folk who are activists, because activism is we're gonna still need activists in the future, and oftentimes women are environmental activists. Also, defunding of police, reallocating those funds to economies of care, and also ensuring that our legal system is able to actually bring about justice. Like right now in the United States, we're all like terrified about who's going to be on the Supreme Court. You know, like it shouldn't be that if one person passes away, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that now we're not sure if we're going to have progressive laws and policies. Like that's unacceptable. And yeah, finally, rethinking borders. I think in a feminist future, we need to rethink borders, because everyone won't have the luxury to stay in the place where their ancestors were born. A lot of these geographies are already disappearing, like here in Louisiana and also other coastal areas around the world, island nation states. So making space for people to relocate, migrate safely, and also that they don't have to worry about sterilization or the kidnapping of their children at these camps and at the borders that currently exist. So defunding police, demilitarizing police, I think, is really important for a feminist future.
Yes to abolition. Thank you so much, Francis. And I'll pass it to Mara to start wrapping up with the almost last question.
Thanks, y'all. You know, I actually saw in the Q&A, which is a good transition for me to also say that folks in the audience should feel free to use the Q&A. If there's anything that you'd like to ask this incredible lineup of folks in front of me, and we'll try to get to that in the next few minutes. I also recognize we're running over, but I don't want to stop this conversation. I think we've got a lot more to say. So if you have to take off, thanks for being with us. And if you can stick around, that'd be great, but we will record this and post this. So if you're wanting to check out the ending as well, it'll be available. But I was seeing in the Q&A, someone was just saying, listening to all of you paint this picture of the kind of future that you not only want to live in, but that you are actively fighting for. It's food for the soul. It's food for the soul. It's just so good to hear those descriptions and that visualization. And I think, as Andrea was talking about earlier, like, this is not just an exercise in, utopian fantasies. It's a critical systems thinking approach, right? It starts with asking ourselves, what kind of world do we want to live in that is peaceful and healthy for all, and how do we get there? And it's hard work. It's hard work, but it's necessary work. So this last question that I'd love to pose to you all, I feel like we've been kind of dancing around this in different ways in all of your thoughts so far, but it really gets at most directly, I think, this question of feeling right now and how we are feeling. And I think for me, something I've been thinking about a lot is, in the description for this event, I think the first sentence that we put was like, young climate feminists are putting in work. We know that young climate feminists are leading the climate justice movement. We know that in the last 2 years in which we've seen these unbelievable global strikes and marches and direct action and communities mobilizing, so often young climate feminists are at the forefront of that, right? But also they're often so invisible in the work of figuring out who sort of to consider the true leaders of these movements and of this change. And I think there's no easier way to see that than the fact that a panel like this of young feminists, I can't remember the last time that I saw one. And I think, from big moments like COP or Climate Week, or even sort of months like March, which is Women's History Month, we so very rarely see these gatherings of young climate feminists who are coming together in conversation to talk about the work that they do. So just having a lot of gratitude for this space and recognizing that young climate feminists, of which you all are so included, are really leading this work, and that I think it's so important to visibilize that in really clear and powerful ways. And part of that is also because this is such an embodied crisis, right? So, and intersecting crises of not only the climate crisis, but this pandemic and uprisings against white supremacy and colonialism around the world. I think all of this so often has these really visible and deeply felt effects on our bodies and on ourselves and on our work, and we rarely talk about that. And I think we talk about that sometimes in the form of what self-care is, but it goes beyond that as well. So I would love to just, that was a lot of random thoughts that I'm having, but I would love to hopefully consolidate this into a question of just asking how it feels for you all to be young climate feminists in this moment. And Francis, I hope you don't hate me for this, but since you've gone last on the last couple, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure.
Yeah, Francis, thanks.
So yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I feel like I'm terrified, my heart is broken, I'm exhausted, but also I'm excited because I think that there's new political opportunities that are opening up. to see transnational solidarity, to be a part of some of those efforts, even to get to know the, you know, the wonderful feminists on this call, you know, that makes, I feel hopeful about that, but also I would say it relates to the overall feeling of that this is an opportunity, a moment of crisis and opportunity. And so, because I want to let other folks speak as well, I just, it feels new, it feels a little scary, but it also feels like it's something that is doable if we work in collaboration with one another.
Thanks, Frances. I feel the same way. Holding those two things at once feels so critical right now, and also calls back to Maria Alejandra's point earlier of deconstructing binaries. We can feel so many things at once. So maybe I'll pass it next to Maggie.
Sorry, I think my internet went out for a second there. I hope everyone can hear me. I think I came into this call feeling very heavy, mainly because there's a community in Mozambique called Cabo Delgado, where people are experiencing intense amounts of violence from state forces in collusion with the mining companies that are operating there. And so today has been a very heavy day, but communing with all of you and having this space to sort of talk and share and to hear what everyone else is dreaming and imagining and doing has been really inspiring. And I think, like Frances said, I leave this space with a sense of hope. I feel a little bit of hope and optimism that the people in this room, the participants as well, and the many communities that we're connected to, that we can shift this. And it will be hard work, but it's possible. So, yeah.
Thanks, Maggie. It's really good to hear that you're finding that feeling coming out of this call as well. And my thoughts are with y'all as well. And thanks for sharing that, sending strength. So next I'll just pass to Sanam.
Thank you. I'm conflicted between trying to speak faster so that we are not too over time and being considerate of our interpreters. You know, being part of movements for justice at a time of climate crisis can feel like the weight of the world is on you, but frustratingly none of the power. But, you know, the saying is, if not us, who? If not now, when? And, you know, I also want to acknowledge this beautiful question in the chat about old feminists and intergenerational collaboration around climate. And I think that's so important. And I personally, you know, it's not just about climate, but broadly in social justice movements, intergenerational collaboration is so important because we stand on the shoulders of the fighters who came before us. I'm just thinking of, you know, all of the crazy activism that environmentalists did in the 80s and early 90s to sound the alarm about what was happening. You know, that was the time to already have a feminist Green New Deal, to already have a climate change action plan. So, you know, every time that I envision a future, it's because of the ideas that I've learned from before. And that's, I think, important to being a young climate feminist, learning from the leaders that have come before. Even some of my ideas come from the anarchists who were worried about steam engines and encouraged walking everywhere because of the pollution that steam engines cause. See, like they knew that coal was going to be a problem a long time ago. And honestly, nothing changes as quickly as it should. And that's why we've been active on this issue for generations. People in power don't take this danger seriously, or they're profiting off it. So I can be filled with anger. I can be filled with ideas like no borders, as we've said, just an equitable transition, at the same time as calling for dismantling all fossil fuel companies and sending their offices you've reached your expiry date message. Or I can be filled with deep sadness and despair when I learn the consequences for Rio Tinto destroying a 46,000-year-old Aboriginal site. The consequence there is to cancel the bonuses of a few executives. All of these things are really, really so frustrating, but you know, we have to keep going and we have to keep learning. And yeah, I also acknowledge the grief and pain that others have expressed so far in this question as well.
Thanks, Sanam. I really love how you bring in history, which I feel like we haven't really touched on yet, which I think all of us probably feel a sense of real gratitude towards taking the lessons of our foremothers, of the feminists who came before us, and not only continuing their legacy, but also seeing ourselves as part of a long continuum that is pushing for transformative change that started with them and continues with us, but will go on beyond us as well. So thanks for bringing in that as well. Patricia, can I pass to you?
Yes, Mara. Thank you. Well, this last question, being a young climate feminist, I guess as a young climate feminist, as an indigenous, I see myself as part of not only climate justice, indigenous or feminist movements, but also as a part of larger social movements. And for me, it is very important because I believe that we all have common struggles to challenge the current neoliberal economic and development system that destroy the environment and deprive us, women, of our human rights. I think in this collective struggle, it is crucial. It is crucial to also recognize how our elders. I saw the chat, so I was like, I think it is also very important to respond to that. But that was something that's already part of my response. So it is also crucial to recognize how our elders have paved the way for us. All the wins, all the achievements, the mountain that we as young climate feminists are standing on right now, and see things even clearer, you know, shape also our struggles and navigate the way how we are learning actually from the experiences that they have been learning from. I guess like we carry the torch of struggle they passed to us. The responsibility is enormous. And I really do believe that in this struggle together, in this collective struggle, we can never stop learning from our elders. I guess another important thing that I want to also say is that it is also crucial and very important to recognize young women in all our diversities and also different layers of how climate crisis is actually affecting us. Only with this, I believe that we can strengthen our solidarity and movements to challenge the current oppressive and growth-focused, market-driven development and economic system. I'm done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. That was so powerful. I think the visual that you were describing with passing on the torch and carrying the torch and the weight and the responsibility of that, but also the honor, that's something that I think is really going to stick with me as well beyond this conversation. Thanks for those words. All right, and now Maria Alejandra, bring us home. What are you thinking about? What are you feeling?
I'm feeling really grateful for this conversation and for listening and for digging into these souls. I think it's part of what fits all of us. I also want to refer to that piece of acknowledging where we come from, and all those generations and all that wisdom that has been constructed and built over years, generations, struggles, and the memory that we have of that as well. And how is it that we're reclaiming the memory of our past generations to become better, no? To become more inclusive, to become more diverse, to learn from the past. I think we, as young climate feminists, are lying in a difficult moment. Like, there's multiple crises unfolding at the same time. All of them seem urgent, emergent, complex. So I think there's a huge space for us to imagine how is it that we can face all these multiple crises without losing our own selves, without, like, with caring for our own body's health, but also the health and the stability and the harmony of our families, communities, territories. I'm thinking a lot about how we come to be in a space or in a moment of time where technology is so much a tool, but also a risky thing, that allows us to be agile, but also, obviously, and as we probably have heard and know, can damage very deeply the sense of everything, right? The sense of democracy, the sense of society, the sense of healing. So I think we have a huge challenge of relating to this modern technological digital world, and learn how to be better hackers in every possible sense. How is it that we hack the capitalist system? How is it that we hack industrialism? How is it that we hack the rational development model setting of the world, while at the same time keeping safe, right? The reality is that there's a lot of us, social, environmental leaders, being harassed, being disappeared, being silenced everywhere, every day. And how is it that we can do the work? How is it that we keep hacking while at the same time knowing that this doesn't need to necessarily be a sacrifice, like a sacrifice zone for many of us? And lastly, I would say that I feel that there was a question in the chat about where does decolonization sit within all these conversations, and I think it's precisely this. I think it's precisely embedded within our ways of dismantling what has been taught to us, which is, I think, one of the scariest things that can happen to me, that we're just monolith, monocrops, unable to just break the limitations and the boundaries that have been set. And how is it that memory and how is it that autonomy and sovereignty play in those radical futures? To me, that's a way of beginning a decolonial process that will probably take some time, but that it's worth the process as well, worth the journey. Thank you for this space.
Thank you, Maria Alejandra. I can't imagine a more powerful way to end. And the call to hack. I think for me, when I was listening to you talk about hacking as well, I was just thinking, this kind of brings us full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning in terms of just how many forms of disruption and how many forms of participating in this future building work there are. There's space for everyone, and there's a role for everyone in this work. And there are so many places in which you can do that. So we're reaching the end of our time. Well, we're actually well over it, but thank you for everyone for sticking around. And we should have known that we would have far more to say than just an hour could contain. We did lose our interpreters only a few seconds ago, who are running to another commitment. So I want to wrap up so that we're not leaving too many folks with the inability to get these last few comments. But I just want to say that hearing you all describe how you are feeling as a young climate feminist right now, we heard hurt, we heard pain, we heard sorrow, mourning, we heard joy, we heard happiness, we heard solidarity, we heard community, and hope and inspiration. And I think that's been a through line in all of this, right? That's been a through line in much of what you all have spoken to in the last hour. And I just want to bring in 3 of the most powerful words that I think I could bring in from someone who who leads much of this envisioning work for so many of us, and that's Mariame Kaba, who's an abolitionist leader in the United States. And she tells us and has taught us that hope is a discipline. Hope is a discipline. We have to work at it, build it, get stronger, make mistakes, learn, and continue practicing it. And I think that is part of our work moving forward as well. And that is part of what young climate feminists do so well. We do so well. So I would just love to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of the panelists who joined us and shared their absolute wisdom, thoughts, experiences, and lessons for us all, and also just sharing this space and building a really incredible community for this hour, and I hope well beyond. My friend and colleague Andrea has just put in the chat some information about WEDO if folks are interested in finding the recording for this. Any follow-up information, we're going to try to include a link to an article that's being published this morning. It probably already was actually, that features these folks again in Ms. Magazine, and so you'll get that as well if you follow us, as well as future events that work at the intersection of feminism and climate justice, and advancing this work through the many movements that we are in and that we are a part of. So I would just love to say thank you. Andrea, thank you for moderating with me. I know that it's been a huge honor for us to be here with you all. And I think with that, we'll close. Maybe we can all hop off and wave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
So much. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.